During this video, I explore the process of creating a digital photo book. There's something incredibly satisfying about having a physical version of your work. I find that it allows me to round off a project and, in a way, put a full stop after the title. It's often difficult to put into words exactly what you've been trying to achieve with a photographic project, but a publication allows the viewer to engage with all aspects: the individual photographs and how they interact with each other, and the whole feel of the book. Obviously, it would be great if a publisher would print your work, but finding someone who will take on that kind of financial commitment is difficult. A book dummy can help publishers to take that leap in understanding, which would be difficult to achieve if they were just looking at a set of emailed images and some text. Even if eventually they decide to redesign the book, they can still grasp the project on multiple levels by looking at what you've produced. Photo books have also become a creative genre on their own. Zine and photo book competitions and festivals have become a big thing now. Digital printing works very differently to litho. The former works really well for low-run print jobs, but then the price per copy is obviously higher. In litho printing, all the effort happens before the machine starts printing, and then you churn out the pages extremely quickly, usually in multiple page setups that match the binding process. I'm going to limit this discussion to low-run digital printing. While I'm exploring the subject, I'll show you pages from a small book that I produced. I didn't think the content would be appealing to a photo book publisher, but I was interested in experimenting with the book format, and I liked the fact that the photographs were quite unique and also that they weren't mine. This gave me a lot of design freedom. While browsing in an antique shop in Cape Town a few years before, I found a reel-to-reel canister. However hard I tried, I wasn't able to open the metal canister, so the shopkeeper dropped the price to almost nothing. When I eventually prized it open at home, I was hit by the stench of film fixer chemicals. The 16mm film had been stewing in these chemicals for probably over half a century, causing the emulsion to crystallize. It was an old black and white training film for pilots produced around the end of the Second World War. It was providing information about radar techniques in order to determine whether a discovered signal came from a friend or foe. That's actually what they called the system, IFF, Identification Friend or Foe. I had to wear an industrial respirator mask while I went through the film, finding frames and sets of frames that interested me. I was more focused on how the crystallization on the emulsion had created chance patterns and how this altered the graphic nature of images. The actual content of the film wasn't all that riveting. I also researched information about the radar technology during that time and created my own supporting imagery. There are a number of practical decisions that need to be made before you get started. The first is, what is the actual purpose of the publication? It could be for sale on demand, so you could try sell the books and then print only when you get orders. It could be for promotion or for a competition. Maybe it's a portfolio of your work or a project that you've just completed. It could also be just that you want to round off a project, which I discussed before, and then allowing yourself to freely move on to something new. The second decision is format. This is going to be partly practical because you may need to tailor the dimensions for a particular purpose. It also depends on the images that you want to include. If they're mainly vertical portraits, an upright format will work well, and if they're landscapes, then perhaps a horizontal format will work. If you've used a particular film format, then the size ratio of the paper will be important. For a 35mm camera, it's obviously longer, and say something like 4x5 will be squatter. Price is also a big factor here because most digital printers work on standard sizes of A5, 4, 3, etc. So you don't want to design something that is an awkward shape because then you'll be wasting a lot of paper. If budget is no object, then basically go wild. The third decision is about the design software or template that you use. I taught myself InDesign by watching endless YouTube videos. The logic that this software uses is very similar to Photoshop, but the difficult part is becoming familiar with the tools and shortcuts so the design process becomes fun rather than just a chore. I don't recommend this route if it's a once-off project. I would say rather find a designer and pay them to sit with you, or you can look at large digital publishing sites like Blurb. They provide templates that are varied and usually really easy to use. The last practical decision is also budget-based. How many pages can you afford, and therefore how many images can you include? You don't want your publication to look like a mail order catalog, so be very aware of giving your images space to breathe. People see so many images every day, so you want your audience to engage with the real essence of your project. You want to include just as many images that are necessary to get across your narrative. This is really a less is more scenario. I would advise doing as much of the conceptualization, editing, and sequencing before you even start thinking about the design phase. Okay, let's say you've produced hundreds of images over a period of time working on a particular project. The next few stages are tricky, but they can also be really creative. There are no fixed rules, but it's best to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. I think that all photographers suffer during the editing phase from an attachment to certain images that actually aren't that great, and if included would weaken the book. What happens with me quite often is that I'll have an image that I worked really hard to get, but I know it really isn't that strong. But I keep it in the edit, and it's mainly because I don't want to admit that I wasted all that time. So you may want to get an opinion from someone or a few people that you trust. For a long time, I had a friend who was brutally honest, which was difficult at times, but I always knew that his only agenda was helping me to create the strongest edit. So with this large collection of images that you have, the first thing you have to do is get the edit down to something that's manageable. Let's say you've decided you want to use 50 photographs. Then I would say that your initial aim was to produce an edit of around 100 or so. I find the best way to start this process is to break it up into stages. First of all, I decide what are my definites, those that I really can't leave out and that are essential to hold my theme together. Then I allow for my second favorites. It's better to be a bit stingy at the beginning so you can leave a bit of wriggle room. Once I've got this smaller edit, I generally produce cheap A5 prints of my selection. It's very difficult to look at sequencing on screen. Having a physical print means that you can shift them around easily and see how the images play off each other. Take some time to experiment with how the images work together and how different communications develop when you sequence them differently. Don't get too set in your ways too soon. It's far better to view the first few attempts as play or basic exploration. The longer you're able to stay open, the more you'll start to see links and threads that you hadn't consciously been aware of during the photographic phase. You'll also start to realize that you need to bring in certain images that support sub-themes or that can be used as bridging images. You really have to allow a lot of time and space for this stage so that things can just evolve naturally. Perhaps later you can bring in your trusted advisors to look at the edited sequence and then just listen to what their responses are. It's your book, so you have to stamp your mark on every stage of the production. But it's also easy to become too inwardly focused and to miss some real obvious factors. So it's a constant process of being open and generous with ideas and then being very logical and strict. You're shifting back and forth between left and right brain thinking. Deciding on design will depend on a lot of factors. It will be influenced by the subject matter, the photographs themselves, but essentially it's a very personal decision on how you feel the design can best reinforce the intent of your project. What you definitely don't want is a designer that uses your photographs to fit their own design ideas. It has to be the other way around. Once you've sat with the final edit and sequence for a long time, start looking at photography books in bookshops or online and collect ideas that you think might work for your project. So when you finally design it yourself or get someone else to help you or start looking at templates, you already have a very clear idea of what you do and don't want. Ideally, one should be present when the printing actually takes place, but in reality, there's a whole lot of things that often make this impossible. Getting a proof before the actual printing can reduce some of the risk, but if you can't watch the paper come off the machine, then there's always the possibility of error and disappointment. The advantage of low-run digital printing is that the outlay is minimal and you have the opportunity to get it right for the next print run. Okay, best of luck if you're planning to print your work soon. Thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you again next time.